Okay, third grade. Today we're going to be talking about landscapes. A landscape is an artwork that takes place outside. It includes the sky, it includes the ground. So you could have something like a mountain landscape, a beach landscape, a farm landscape, forest landscape, even a desert landscape. So landscape is anywhere outside where you can see the sky, you can see the ground. It usually covers a large space. Now all landscapes have something called the horizon line. That's where the earth and the sky touch each other. They come to a point where they meet up, and that's the horizon line. All landscapes will have a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. The foreground is what is closest to you. It looks big because it's up close. It starts at the bottom of the page when we're drawing, and it overlaps everything else. Overlap just means to go on top of. So my red tree, you can't see the car through the tree because the car is behind the tree. The middle ground is exactly what it sounds like. It's in the middle. It looks medium-sized, and it's between the foreground and the horizon line, and it overlaps just the background. And the background is small. It's very far away, and it's back by the horizon line, and everything else overlaps it. So let's do a little bit of practice. What area of the picture is my arrow pointing to? Is it foreground, middle ground, or background? If you said foreground, you are correct. This is the part of the picture that is closest to us, and therefore that is the foreground. How about this one? Foreground, middle ground, or background? If you said background, you are correct. The trees are very small because they are far away in the background. What about this one? Foreground, middle ground, or background? If you answered middle ground, you are correct. The arrow is pointing to the trees. In front of the trees, there's water. Behind the trees, there's mountains. Therefore, that's what's in the middle. And one more practice. Foreground, middle ground, or background? If you answered foreground, you are correct because it is pointing to the bottom of the page, which means it is what is closest to us. So we're going to do some examples. We're looking at winter landscapes for our project. So in this landscape, the foreground would be these trees right here. That's what's closest to us. That's our foreground. The middle ground would be all this lovely snow, and the background would be the mountain and the trees behind us. Pretty simple, right? Here's another example. Can you identify what's in the foreground? If you answered the water right here, that would be correct. The middle ground would be the snowy area, and the background is the mountains and all those fun little trees. And one more. Can you identify what is in the foreground? That would be the water. Can you identify what's the middle ground? All these lovely houses right here are middle ground. And can you identify the background? Mountains, baby. So foreground, middle ground, background. So when we go to draw, we're going to ignore that. Let's pull up something we can draw with. Here we go. When we go to draw, we're going to draw a winter landscape, but we are going to use foreground, middle ground, and background to help us create our drawing. So when I draw, I'm going to start with my foreground, and I'm going to work my way back because the foreground is what's closest, it's what's in front. That's how I'm going to start. So you can choose any item or landform that you want to be in the foreground. Let's say, I'm going to do some nice little hills here. So I've got foreground. Do another landform for the middle ground. And maybe I'm going to have some mountains in my background. Once I have a foreground and middle ground and background, then I can start to add details. Maybe I'll throw a tree here in my middle ground. Don't judge my tree. I'm drawing with my finger here. Or I could include a nice little fence running alongside the front of my foreground. Oh. Pardon the school bell. Put little snow caps on my mountains. Maybe I could add a sun. So once I got a foreground, middle ground, and background, I can start to add more details to make my landscape special. So this is our assignment today. We're going to draw a winter-themed landscape. So notice, like when I did my tree, there's no leaves. So think winter, because it's winter. And we are going to draw it, and you're going to trace over all of your pencil lines in Sharpie. That means all of them. So let's pretend my highlighter here is Sharpie. I'm going to trace over every single stinking pencil line I have made on my paper. There should not be anything left that doesn't get traced with the Sharpie. It will look a lot better than my hideous highlighter. So that's our assignment for today. When you get your paper, please put your name on the back, and then you may get started. Okay, so I've got my winter landscape that I drew last time. All my pencil lines are traced in Sharpie. I'm ready to do the next portion. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be looking at patterns. Patterns are anything that repeats. Repeating swirls, repeating circles, repeating crisscross lines, anything that is repeating to create a design. We're going to fill each section that we've created in our landscape with a different pattern. Your rules for making the patterns are simple. 1, we're going to be using Sharpie markers to create our patterns today. And 2, you are going to do a 2-part pattern. So what do I mean when I say a 2-part pattern? I mean your pattern has to have 2 different components to it. So this, if I do straight across lines, that's a 1-part pattern. I've done one thing, I've done lines. To make a 2-part pattern, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add something different to my pattern. So I'm adding polka dots in between my lines. That's a 2-part pattern. If you want another example, do something. I could do zigzag lines. Yay, I've made a 1-part pattern. Now I've got to switch and make it a 2-part pattern. So I'm going to add something else to my pattern to complete it. Now I'm going to go ahead and work for a little bit. You guys can watch me as I add the patterns. Okay, I've got my patterns on here, and the last thing I'm going to do to finish adding color is I'm going to marker watercolor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to outline each area with a regular old marker. I'm just outlining. I'm not coloring anything in. So once I have that outline, I'm going to use a little bit of water and my brush to make the markers start to bleed. Now you'll notice my Sharpie is not bleeding, and it's not going to because my Sharpie is a permanent marker. The other markers, however, are washable, so I can get them to bleed. Okay, so I'm just gonna rub it until I get it the way that I want it. Alright, so it's a subtle effect. It's not a lot, but you can tell that it makes a big difference. So now I'm gonna go ahead and do that with all of my artwork.